Um, so it isn't, it isn't a, finally, it's not so much an intellectual thing. It's more like how it is when an animal is smelling blood. It's like a cougar, when the wind is right, doesn't say, well, I better get down. He just does it. It's the same thing with a piano player. He's moving from one chord to another, but he's not talking about it to himself. He's just doing it. And I think for me, if you write, it leads to that. The more you work it, the more you get past your ability to think about it, but just do it. Just take it and do it and be willing to be wrong, to have to do it again. But there's two things that are true. One is that no matter how difficult it is while you're trying to do it, if you're trying to do it, it's always going well because you're working. And it's not ever supposed to be easy anyway. And the other thing is, there's nothing you can do to ruin it. You can't harm it. You can't mess it up. The worst thing you can do on your worst day is make it necessary to do it again. If I'm making a sculpture and I'm carving out the face and I hit it wrong and the whole stone falls apart, but it doesn't work that way with language or with books. You write and you go on and make the mistakes. And I made, I had so many blind alleys with this where I'm going, well, this is what this is. And then I went, it didn't feel right. But it's all about how it feels. And
So when you cut stuff, I imagine you cut a lot. What do you do with it? Do you have a special file for it, or
I
do you
save
just
it.
throw it out?
Oh,
Save
no.
it?
Duke University paid me a lot of money for all my trash about 15 years ago. So I save it all.
What about the one on the fire, the one you
Well,
burned?
that's the big mistake. I had this little auto da fe out in my backyard with this novel I was working on called Spirits. This big novel, I don't know, 400 pages of it in typescript. But the Atlantic had bought a story of mine that was actually a chapter from this novel. And that was the only thing in the novel that was any good as far as I was concerned. It was just, everything was just so intractably hard and I couldn't figure it. So I said, I'm going to burn this damn thing. And I went out in the backyard and had a little auto da fe. I lighted it on fire. It's the first day of summer, 1985. I was on a Guggenheim. And, but the thing that happens is it burns from the outside in and then goes up in the air. And I'm standing over looking at it going, well, that's not such a bad line. Yeah, I can't unlight the fire.
So 3 points of view in Playhouse. And I think you said you like third person best. Third person point of view. Have you said that?
No, I preferred it for a while. Yeah.
Talk about why.
Well, because I always had a problem with feeling like if this is a person telling the story, why the hell doesn't the person just say, and this is what happened? Why do they do all that stuff leading up to what happened? The Great Gatsby, yeah, a guy just ran over and killed him. It was terrible. And of course, that isn't the point. And I was arguing with myself with the form, the nature of it, and part of it came from the experience of the first novel. I had two first-person chapters in that novel. One was called She Speaks, and one was called He Speaks. And the guy had bought the novel and said, I'd really like you to go home and see if you couldn't do those two in third person. And I went home really ticked, going, oh, man, he bought the thing. For God's sake, he wants me to do this. this and go home and do that. And I had had such an inspired feeling time writing the woman she speaks. Elizabeth was her name. And I was addressing her. I'd say, wait, Elizabeth, I got to go use the restroom. I'll be back, because it was going so well. And so I finally, after a week and a half of fuming about it, I sat down and went, well, let's try this. And what happened was that it still is the single most liberating thing that ever happened to me as a writer, because as I was writing, I realized that I had taken 15 pages to establish something that a third person narrator could take care of in one sentence. And the thing was so much shorter, but clearer. And I realized, that was what it needed. And so after that, I took that with me and thought, first person. And it's funny, my twin brother, Robert Bausch, who's a terrific writer, we lost him back in 18, but all of his books are in first person and they're brilliant. But I didn't even try it again until I wrote Mr. Field's Daughter, which is my fourth novel, I think. I had a chapter called Certain Testimony, and it was first person from one of the characters. But anyway, first person is the most complicated and difficult point of view there is. There's an added character you've got to deal with. Then you have to decide whose story it is. Is it this character's story, or is this character a witness to something? Two examples that are rather famous. In Gatsby, the witness is Nick Carraway, and it's Daisy and Tom and that story. In A Farewell to Arms, it's the speaker's story. It's he's telling this thing that happened to him. It ends with him saying, and I walked back to the hotel in the rain. He's lost the love of his life. The other thing is that in the first person narration, the whole thing has to be colorated with its outcome, because the speaker has been through the experience, so they wouldn't be talking. And so that is also, you have to take care of foreshadowing and, adumbrations and things that sort of, so that the reader at the end, you want the reader at the end, you hope, of a story or a novel to go, oh, and then go, oh. Like, I see, I get it,
Well, we have to talk about short stories, and we especially have to talk about The Man Who Knew Belle's Star, because we have some student, Deborah is in my class, and we covered this story in a few classes. And I know some people are watching who read this story. They're very curious about the ending and just that entire story. It's a very dark story, which is a little different from a lot of your stories.
Well, it's it's a lesson for me, that story, because what happened was I was writing my first collection. It was called Spirits. And because I liked the title of the novel I burned, I liked the title. So, write a novella called Spirits. And I was writing this story. It all comes from being in a car thinking about that wonderful movie, Jack Nicholson in 5 Easy Pieces, where he and the Karen Black character are driving north because his father has had a stroke, and he's a very talented musician, and Karen Black is someone he uses. He doesn't really care about her. And they pick up these two hitchhikers, and one of the hitchhikers is this woman who keeps saying, everything's dirty, it's dirt, everything's dirt. I want to go to Alaska because it looks very white. I want to go where it's clean and there's no dirt. There's filth. No, it's filth. I don't mind dirt, filth. And he's driving along listening to this. And in the car, I'm thinking, what if somebody picked up a hitchhiker and it was serious? It wasn't, this woman this crazy you could laugh at. So in the story, there's a line, if you ever get to reading the story, where he says, where are you headed? And she goes, down. And I thought when I wrote it that she was telling him she was dying. And I went on with my day and said, I'll deal with this tomorrow, and of course, I've created him as a bad guy. He's been in prison. He beat up a sergeant in the Air Force. He's been dishonorably discharged. His father was a drunk and was in the hospital and all that stuff. And he went to see him, and he had $5,000 of insurance money in his pocket, and he was headed west. And he's looking at her, and in his way, a woman who travels on the road is likely to be kind of loose, thinking these things to himself, holding in his belly and all that stuff, trying to look attractive and mysterious. As he says, I just come from prison. And anyway, when she comes in, they stop at this diner, and in the scene in the diner, the man says, I'm closing up. We're too far off the highway. He says, I'll fix you something on the house. You want a hamburger? And he says, you can have a hot dog to the girl. I can't remember now how it comes about that she doesn't want the hamburger. And guaranteed to please, he says. And she pulls a pistol out of her purse that I didn't know she had. And she says, how about emptying that cash register, Mr. Poormouth? And he says, hey, there's nothing in the cash register. And she shoots him. And the scene says he fell in a great clattering of the dishes behind the bar. And I went, hell, I've been watching too much TV. This is bullshit. And I stood up and said, God, I don't know what the hell's, man. And I went back to another story called, it doesn't matter what it was called, but it was in Spirits. Oh, it was called Ancient History. And so I'm in a bar after class with a student, like 3 days later. And he's saying, I don't want my character to do this thing that he's doing. And I said, you got to let him do it, man. Come on. It's like shake the black ball and see what comes up. And you got to go with what your subconscious presents you with. And as I'm saying it, a voice in my head is saying, why don't you go home, dummy, and follow your own advice, So I went home and picked it up and wrote it out to the end. I got to tell you that at Penn Faulkner ceremonies in Washington, D.C., everybody had to read a little, and I read the end of that story. And about 9 people came up to buy the book, and they kept saying, can't wait to get home and read and see what happens to that guy. And at the end of the story, he's got a sprained ankle. He's on his belly in the woods, and she's coming down the hill with a gun, looking like someone with time and the patience to use it. And that's the very end of the story. It doesn't say. So they're all going, I can't wait to get home and see what happens to that guy. And I'm going, I hope you like the book. There's other stories in the book.
The story is wonderful. It's wonderful. Do we have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? All right, Daryl.
Unfortunately, I haven't read all of your books and all of your books, but the one that got my attention was the novel Peace. And it takes place in the Second World War. And you're not old enough to have been in the Second World War, but I wondered how you chose that for the story that you did.
Well,
Okay, so let's repeat the question for the
I'm sorry.
YouTube. So the novel piece, how did you choose to,
He's not in the Second World War.
right,
The novel takes place in the
Right.
Second World War.
right,
How did you end up empathizing with that?
right. Second World War, which you were not a part of. How did you find that story and get into it?
Well, it was the seed of it was the story that my father would tell as a funny story. And the funny story was that this old Italian guy led them up over this hill and then led them back down. They came across the body of a dead German. They had no idea what that was about. And when they got to the bottom of the hill, the sergeant said, lieutenant said, take him out in the woods and shoot him. And my father argued and said, what are you talking about? And he says, take him out and shoot him. It's an order. Because at Salerno, there had been German infiltration. And they were wearing, American uniforms and shoot. People froze on their machine guns and shot their own comrades in the back because they were so scared. So he would tell the story, and laughingly, people would laugh. He'd say, I came this close to shooting the son of a bitch because he wouldn't run. He says, when he got into the woods with the guy, he said, Via, go, because he didn't want to shoot him. One of the reasons was my father was a devout Catholic, and this Italian guy is saying the Hail Mary in Italian, and my father recognized the prayer. So when they got out of sight and down the hill and away from everybody in the trees, he said, Via. And the guy just was frozen, just wouldn't do it. I mean, he'd urinated himself while he was standing there and they were talking about it. And my dad told that detail, which stuck with me. And finally, he said he went off in the trees, but he would say, I came this close, I'm telling you. Not because he was Italian or Nazi or whatever he was, because I was irritated and I'd been through so much. And how much killing takes place in those circumstances. So I wrote it as a story. I was like 20, 25, and gave it to him. A little, 4-page story, exactly as he told it. And I love this that he said about it. He said, I disagree, as if it was a proposal or something. He says, it wasn't like that at all. And then he said, look, we overturned a cart the day before, and a German soldier and a prostitute fell out. He didn't use those words. He said a crowd officer and a whore fell out. And so we took them prisoner, but they could have shot us up if they wanted to, So one night I just finished a long story. I think it's a good story called The Harp Department in Love. And I was in Memphis. It was near my father's birthday. And I went in and lay down next to Lisa, realizing that I was really cold. I was only a little sliver of glass was separating me from 23 degrees. And I lay there in the cold and started thinking about my father and that past where I tried to write that story. And I thought, I'm old enough to write that story now, and I don't have to hold myself to the story. I can make stuff up. And I got up and went and wrote the first chapter as the sun was coming up. And then wrote past. There's a place in the novel where very early on where the sergeant shoots this woman who's obviously not involved, is innocent. And so his quandary is that he has witnessed a murder in the middle of all this prodigal killing. But I wrote past it because I was anxious to get to going up over the hill and then coming back down and the whole thing leading to him saying, Via, go. So I was a good 15, 20 pages past it and went, wait a minute, I can't. That's a murder. I can't just walk away from that. And it turns out to be the moral underpinning of the entire book. Again, it's going with what occurs to you,
Any other questions? I have a question about dialogue, because you did something for my Palm Springs retreat people a few weeks ago where we were asking you about dialogue, and you talked about how dialogue, each character needs to do something, right? Everything that they say, and you recited a Cool Hand Luke soliloquy.
Do you want to hear that?
I want to hear it. Because I wished it had been recorded back then, and now it is.
Okay, this is a little pass. I went to school on this in a theater in Chicago when I saw Cool Hand Luke. I thought, that is how you write dialogue. That's dialogue. Listen to how much you learn about the two people talking. One of them is Luke, who's in prison. The other is his mother, who's in the bed of a truck, smoking a cigarette, having been driven there by Luke's brother. And Luke walks up to the truck. And it won't be exact, but it'll be close enough because you'll hear how much you find out. He says, how'd you find me? And she goes, oh, that Helen. Now you're learning right there. That Helen gives all kinds of stuff. That Helen, she sent your clothes, and John wrote to the police. And then she pauses and says, they letting you smoke here? He goes, smoking it up here, boss. And she gives him a cigarette. And then she says, always hope to see you well fixed. Have me a bunch of grandkids to mess around with. I don't know where I'm going to find them. I guess she says, I wish people was like dogs, Luke. Comes a time when the bitch don't care anymore. She don't have no love or hope to give her pain. She says, I'm leaving the place to John. No, before that, she says, I ain't going to ask what you're going to do when you get out because I'll be dead and it don't matter. He says, well, wasn't such a hell of a life. You didn't want to live forever. Oh, I had me some high old times. And your father, your dad wasn't much for sticking around, but damn it, he made me laugh. Well, I'd like to know him, what you talk about him. Oh, he'd have broke you up. And a big cough. And he hands water towards her, and she's, and she goes, Lou. And he says, yeah, Arletta. She says, what went wrong? And there's a pause. And he says, nothing, everything's cool as can be. And then he goes, Arletta, I always tried to be free and above board like you. But I don't know, I just can't seem to find me no elbow room. Well, you always had good jobs. And that girl from Kentucky, oh, I've taken a shine to her. And she sure ran off with that convertible fella. The idea you marrying got you all bollocksed up, trying to be respectable. You was boring the hell out of all of us. I'm leaving the place to John. That's good, he earned it. Ain't got nothing to do with it. You see, sometimes you have a feeling for a child. With John, I just didn't. Oh, don't feel you have to say anything. And as that's going on, you find out about who these two people are. And that's the only reason it's there. The thing that I found out is, you have two people standing at a train station. If they don't have anything to say to each other, don't make them say it. I mean, the thing is, most times trying to be realistic, you introduce dialogue that is inert. It's just people talking. And Lisa, my wife, put it best. I was reading a thesis that had gone down that path. This is about 5 years ago that had gone down that path where this dialogue was just going on and on. It was endless and it wasn't doing anything. And I said, listen to this passage. And I read about 5 lines and Lisa said, that's not dialogue, that's conversation. And I said, God, that's it. That's the best way to put it. You're not writing conversation. Dialogue is very structured in a way to give the matter of the story. So when you're trying to write dialogue, think in terms, in revision now. You can't think about this stuff when you're just first drafting, composing. But in revision, think about, are these lines doing more than one thing? Here's a line of dialogue that is only doing one thing. Well, they never find you in this logging camp we've brought you to against your will on July 4th, 1984. That's a very badly exaggerated example of what I'm talking about, but it's from a piece I read about 30 years ago. So it's not that you have to hold exposition back or anything that gives that sort of matter. The context is exactly there in the dialogue, what they say to each other.
Any questions? Okay.
How do we get the relevant? The way I would do it would be the way I've done it for years. I say they had got through the introductions. And then he said, because it isn't anything the reader needs to hear. And then what, the matter that needs to be heard is, whatever it is. And always, um, I've always done a thing I myself call the veer, where somebody says something and it's answered with a question. Are you going to come home at 6 tonight? Every night you ask me if I'm going to come home at 6. Why don't you ask sometime if I'm going to come home at 5 or 7? Oh, come on now, you're just being ridiculous. Well, I don't know when I'm coming home. Well, you don't have to tell me. Well, I didn't ask you to say anything about it. And you're going back and forth where it's not directly, rhetorically responding to what's said. So, like that.
Any other questions before we end? Okay.
Hello. I do.
The last book you read for fun.
Every book I read is for fun, truly. Right now, believe it or not, I'm reading the Vasily Grossman, but I'm also reading Winston Churchill's History of World War II. I'm reading Triumph and Tragedy, the last volume. It's amazing. It's got all these amazing passages from the very leaders themselves, letters from Stalin, memos from generals and stuff. And Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower, who we think of as a sort of a lot of people do, as a boob, was he comes through and you realize there's a reason the guy got to be president. So like that. But history is my light reading in the sense that, I have so many productive friends. I'm reading Tim O'Brien's wonderful America Fantastico. And that book, it's like, the things they carry. It's like Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony and decided he'd set the music world on its ear by writing a rock and roll opera. I mean, that is just the best way to express it. It's so different and fun and wicked. And I'm reading Joyce Carol Oates' book, and she always has a book, and I love her for it. And I'm reading, oh, you don't have it, the Jill McCorkle's book. And I'm reading about 13 or 14 books at a time always. And I just pick one up and read it for a while and put it down and pick another one up. When I finish one, and pick up another one. It's always at about 13. And I couldn't exist if I didn't. It's the best damn thing in the world as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that sort of leads into my next question, which is, because you've been teaching for a long time, and what is the one thing you try to get your students to do to improve their writing?
Read. I try to get them to read. Last spring, I assigned Chekhov to my advanced fiction workshop. There's a site online where all the stories are there, and I said, I want you to read them all. And I gave him a list of about 13, one a week. I said, but you should probably find yourself wanting to read them all. And believe it or not, a woman who was in her 50s, an English woman, said, Chekhov. I just can't stand him. I said, you haven't really said anything about Chekhov. You've just said something about yourself. And she didn't get what I meant and said, well, I mean, where's the uplift? And I just sat there flummoxed. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I think about it now. Of course, it's not about sermons. It's not about uplift or any of that stuff. It's about life. But, but that's the only way. I never met a person whose writing I was impressed by and whom I thought was probably a better writer than me, who wasn't also better read, who hadn't also read more widely. So just, and I said this in my class last night. The amazing thing about this, what we do with language, here are 6 lines, and they're going to move you. In English, they're going to move you. I know it. It's a poem called Cremation by Robinson Jeffers. It goes like this. It nearly cancels my fear of death, my dearest said, when I think of cremation. To rot in the earth is a loathsome end, but to roar up in flame. Besides, I'm used to it. I've flamed with love or fury so often in my life. No wonder my body is tired. No wonder it is dying. Scatter the ashes. Now you tell me that didn't get you. 6 lines. And that's the thing about all of it, that it's meaning compact in a poem or meaning expanded in Shakespeare or Tolstoy. It's all about the amazing feeling of being connected to the souls of others, to be a part of what Conrad called the human family, the majesty of the human family. So what happens to one of us happens to all of us, which is why we ache so much for what's going on in the Middle East right now. So, and I'm raised Catholic, but I'm lighting a menorah in the class. I mean, in the house, we're celebrating both. We do Hanukkah and Christmas. So.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, before we end, I want to remind you that we're in a bookstore. And the way we keep indie bookstores alive is to shop here, right? I mean, if you have to buy things on Amazon, other stuff, like underwear or shampoo, right? But books, indie bookstores. So Richard's book, Playhouse, is out there. Whoops, for sale. This is what it looks. This is the arc. So it looks a little better than this. My book, Pen on Fire, is out there. All great gifts. And I want to thank you all for being here. And thank you to Sam and Mike for having us. And thank you, Richard.
Pleasure.